Let's read. It's called I Hate English. And it's by Ellen Levine. All right. I hate English, Maymay said in her head in Chinese. So she speaks Chinese. Maymay was smart in school, in her school in Hong Kong, in Chinese. But her family moved to New York. She didn't know why. She didn't want to move, and she said that all in Chinese. Chinatown in New York was okay. People looked like people she knew. People talked like people she knew in Chinese. In New York, in school, everything happened in English. Such a lonely language. Each letter stands alone and makes its own noise, not like Chinese. Sometimes English letters fight each other. We will go on a class trip, the teacher said in English. T-R-I-P, thought Maymay. The letter T and R bang against each other, and each keeps its own sound, not like Chinese. Maymay loved Chinese, especially writing, fast strokes, short strokes, long strokes. The brush, the pen, the pencil, all seemed to fly in her hand, but that was in Chinese. Maymay wouldn't speak in school. Most of the time, she understood what her teacher said, but everything was in English, and Maymay couldn't speak English. One day, her cousin Bing took her to Chinatown Learning Center. Students brought their homework for help, but not Maymay. She couldn't do work in English. Tutors helped the other ones with their English. Maymay helped the little ones with arithmetic. She was good at arithmetic. That's another word for math. Numbers weren't English or Chinese. They were just numbers. Maymay loved the center. She talked and listened and explained and argued. She did everything in Chinese. She helped the director set up the tables. She played ping pong and checkers. She sang songs. She wrote letters to friends in Hong Kong, all in Chinese. Dear Yifeng, she wrote in Chinese, how would you like to visit me? She laughed as she finished the letter. Then she had to write the address in English. Silly post office in New York, she thought. Why can't they read in Chinese? Maymay had a dream. She thought about it at least once a day, sometimes twice or 3 times. She told Bing about it in Chinese. Everybody would go on a plane to Hong Kong and everybody would speak Chinese. Instead, she took a field trip to Jones Beach. Maymay and her friends rode on 3 trains and 1 bus. They brought lunch, bathing suits, towels, and empty pails. The trip took 2 hours, and they talked and joked the whole way in Chinese. Leo and Bing buried themselves in the sand. Anne and Mona built a castle on top of them. Shriek, said Maymay, let's dig for shellfish. And off they went with their pails. You can't eat those, said the lifeguard. Maymay smiled and kept on digging. He probably doesn't know how to cook them, Shrek said. She was right. The director made the fire in the picnic area and cooked the shellfish. Nobody said a word. Everybody was busy. very busy eating. At last, Mei looked up and said delicious in Chinese. And then one day, a terrible thing happened. A teacher came to the learning center to help Mei with English. Who was this person with short hair and blue eyes? Kind of like Miss Tristani. And why was she smiling? Mei was afraid she wouldn't speak a word of English or Chinese. Hello, I'm Nancy, the person said. She pointed to an empty table. Let's sit down. Mei understood the teacher in English. The teacher had a book and she read a story. Mei forgot that she didn't want to listen. The story was interesting, even if it was in English. It was about a boy who lived in New York more than 100 years ago. His family wanted to move to California. Mei knew about California. She smiled to herself as she thought about California in Chinese. The teacher read that the family crossed the country in a covered wagon. Covered wagon, thought Mei. She didn't know the word for covered wagon in Chinese. Mei didn't want to hear any more. She didn't want English to have words that she didn't know. She felt sad, and a tear slid down her cheek. She didn't want the teacher to see, but the teacher did, and she said, "Let's stop for today." That night, Mei felt afraid again. She wasn't sure why. She felt she might lose something. She felt she had lost something. She felt, I don't know. Well, good night, said her mother in Chinese. And she fell into a deep sleep. She dreamt about Hong Kong. In the dream, she went to see Yi Fong, and Yi Fong said, "Who are you?" in English. "Who am I?" dreamt Mei. "I don't even remember my name." She woke up shouting, "I am Mei," in Chinese. The next day, Mei was mad. She stared at the teacher. She glared at the teacher. And then she said, "I don't care," to the teacher in English. "Very good," said Nancy. "I knew you could speak English. But I don't think you really want to learn," Nancy continued. "And that's too bad." "Why is it too bad?" thought Mei in Chinese. The teacher seemed to read her mind, because in America, almost everything happens to be in English. You don't want to go to an American movie. You don't want to ask for pizza. Don't you want to have ice cream cone? Don't you want to read the signs at the zoo? Don't you want to talk with me? "I want to talk with you," said Nancy in English. Mei turned away. She wanted to tell Nancy that she liked her, but she couldn't say it. All she could say was, "I'm sorry," in English. Nancy, the teacher, suddenly jumped up. "Get your coat," she said to Mei. "We're going to take a walk." Mei said goodbye and in Chinese. On the street, a strange thing happened. Nancy didn't ask Mei to talk. Nancy didn't care if Mei talked. Nancy didn't want Mei to talk. It was the teacher Nancy talking in English. She told Maymay about her 3rd grade teacher. You guys are in 3rd grade. She told Maymay about her favorite book. She told Maymay that she loved tomatoes and potatoes. She told Maymay about Mr. Schwartz, her dog. We were talking about that today. Tomatoes and potatoes and dogs. She told Maymay everything in English. Martin, we're almost done. Don't be, you're not tired yet. Maymay thought about her school. She thought about her favorite book. She thought about her favorite food and her cat in Chinese. But Nancy wouldn't stop talking. She went on and on and on and on. Kind of like how Martin's feeling about me right now, I think. Nancy didn't seem to hear. She kept on talking. She started reading the store signs. She read the names forwards and backwards. And she talked in English. Stop, cried Maymay. She couldn't stand it anymore. She felt invisible. I want to talk, she shouted in English. And before you could think about it, she began talking about Children's Day in Hong Kong. You get lots of presents. She talked about the dragon dances on Chinese New Year. She talked about her street in Hong Kong and all her friends nearby. She talked for about 22 minutes without stopping in English.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Nancy was laughing. As Maymay talked, Nancy laughed more and more.
Why are they laughing? Why are they laughing?
Hold on, we'll talk about it in a second. She laughed a little and then she shook with laughter. They both laughed so hard, neither one could say a word in English or Chinese. Thank you, said Nancy as she gave Maymay a hug. For what? Asked Maymay, still laughing. For giving me, said Nancy, a present of English. You are welcome, said Maymay. And to this day, Maymay talks in Chinese and English whenever she wants. All right, friends, I'm going to unmute you.
Mommy?
Yes, now we can talk. All right, I know that was long and we're getting tired. But Christian, you asked the question, why was she laughing? Why do you think she was laughing?
I don't know.
You don't know? Does anyone else have an idea? Why do you think Maymay was laughing?
I don't know.
Maybe they're saying like funny stuff to each other.
Yeah, she was saying funny stuff. Did she finally learn to speak in English to her teacher? Yeah, a little bit. She learned to talk in English with her teacher and learned about everything around her and how to have fun in America.
Yeah, and I have a pet.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Some of the words sounded a little funny to her as they were new words she was learning, so they may have sounded funny.
Mm-hmm.